So good morning, everybody. I am Patrizia Morgante, the USG Communication Officer. I want to acknowledge the presence of different members of the USG board, specifically Sister Yolanda that everybody saw before. Sister Yolanda Kafka, she's our president, and Sister Pat Murray, she's present right now and she's the executive secretary. I will give the floor to them at the very end before closing our webinar so they can share with us what USG is doing to help and to accompany the sisters in this moment. And if you have something to ask, this is the right time to do it, or by email. So thank you very much for your participation, and a big thank to Sister Maryanne Loughry. She's a Sisters of Mercy. She's a very dear friend of USG. She's taking care of the health of the sisters. We had with her good workshops, good webinars on different themes. She's also a psychologist. So welcome, Sister Maryanne. Florence, I think you have to unmute her microphone. Just a second, Maryanne.
But Therese is doing it at the same time, so I cannot do it.
Okay. Well, first of all, good morning or good evening or good afternoon, depending on what time zone people are in. And it's a pleasure to join you, though it's a time that's incredibly difficult for all of us. As Patricia said, I'm a Sister of Mercy. I'm a psychologist. I've spent most of my life working with refugees in different parts of the world. And also you can probably pick up from my accent that I'm Australian. People tell me that's pretty clear. My special thanks to Sister Patricia Murray and to the UISG for setting up this webinar at this time. And first of all, I really want to start by acknowledging how really difficult this time is for us. It's extraordinary times. And I'm very aware that most of us have been profoundly impacted. I'm also aware that we're impacted at different times, and some of you have experienced already deaths in your community, and others of us are almost like waiting to see what's going to happen. As a friend of mine said, it's like waiting for a tsunami to hit. I'm wanting to acknowledge it as extraordinary times, and very much picking up on what Pope Francis said to us earlier last week in his address, his solitary address, which was very powerful, that for weeks now, for most of us, it's been evening. And I'm sure for many of us, it's been night. I'm aware that we're all facing this crisis, this pandemic crisis, on multiple fronts that have exposed our vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities of others. Many of us have had experienced loss in community, in family, loss in our ministry, and we also know that there's more to come. I also want to acknowledge at the very beginning that there has been and is a lot of material already out there about how to cope. I have used the title about how to better cope because I'm aware that you are already doing your best. So I've deliberately used that term, how to better cope. And what I'm going to share with you today is material that I have gleaned from responsible agencies, as well as from some mental health professionals who are friends of mine that I have a great deal of respect for. I have a small PowerPoint, and I only have a couple of images. And that's just to assist me to stay on track. And I think they capture the essence of what I want to convey today. So I will now share my screen with you. It will take me 1 second so that you can see my images. Okay. So you will see in this slide, it comes from the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. So that alone tells you that it's a source that in many parts of the world where we...
Sr Maryanne, we can see your PowerPoint. You have to share your screen. Sorry.
I thought I had, sorry. I will just reverse the engine. Right, I'm coming back, and then I'm coming. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing. Florence?
Yeah, so Florence will help you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm still disabled, Florence.
It's okay now.
Ah, now I have it.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So, okay. Thank you. So as I was saying, this is it's a slide. It comes from, you can see at the top, from the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, and its source at the very bottom is the World Health Organization. I'll come back to why it's important to have reputable sources. I've mentioned already extraordinary times. This pandemic challenges us at many, many, many levels, and a lot of it is unknown. The virus is in our community, it's in our countries, it's in our world. And what it presents is complex, it's threatening and unpredictable. It's a perfect recipe for stress, a perfect recipe for stress. And today I'm going to say again and again that it's normal to feel anxious and stressed in this time. So you'll see on the image that I have, the first image is one of, it's saying it's normal to be sad, stressed, confused, scared. So I'd actually be worried if people weren't anxious and stressed at this time. The question for us is how to manage that anxiety and stress. And that's our challenge at an individual level and at a community level. I also want to bring another dimension in that isn't in a lot of the literature, but is starting to emerge. And that's that amongst the anxiety and stress, we have a lot of grief. Now, when I talk about grief, I'm not just referring to our experience of death, which is profound at this time. It's also our lack of normalcy, lack of connection, our fear of the economic toll that's going to happen to our communities, our businesses, our countries. In the air, I would say there's a collective grief. Just to give a small example, I was just 2 weeks ago in the US and left because of the virus. And at the airport, when I was leaving, it was very strongly a somber moment. People were looking at you and just shaking their head. You had a sense, I had a sense that this was a time that we've never seen before. So the collective grief. I also want to just highlight a couple of stories that have come to me that, again, further highlight this. One is from a dear friend of mine who's a major superior in Myanmar. And he wrote when he was putting some of his staff on planes to go back to their own country for their own safety. And he was clearly staying. And he said, given the health system in Myanmar, it was like waiting for a tsunami to hit. That his email, his writing was one of, it was very somber, and I think the word grief came to me. A second one, very different, a woman in Boston wrote to me saying her 90-year-old parents are in self-isolation So every day she drives down their street and waves to them. She can't talk to them, she can't be with them, but she can let them see that she still cares by driving past their house. Again, that's something that is showing the grief of what we used to be able to do and what we can't do now. A colleague of mine, a mental health professional, has also pointed out that the virus affects us fundamentally, because what the virus does is stop us hugging, kissing, shaking hands, touching somebody. It's a physical distancing that we've been invited to enter into to stop the virus, but it interferes with us fundamentally. And we grieve these losses. We grieve not being able to do what is fundamental to us. The diagram that I've got here shows you the next two images. Be aware that not everything you hear about the virus may be true. As I've said, it's normal at this stage to feel sad and stressed and scared. It's a human response. But if we listen continually to different sources about the virus, we put ourselves into a situation of increasing our anxiety and stress. Let me just talk a bit about anxiety and stress. The first thing I want to say is anxiety is, as I've said earlier, a normal reaction. It has a purpose. The purpose of anxiety is to put us on alert. It's to make us more ready for potential threats. So in a situation like this, when we're hearing a lot, our alerts are up. We are concerned and we are anxious. Our brains biologically are wired for this anxiety, and we are wired to become anxious. So it's not something that we can easily turn down. It's there as a protective measure. But the biggest challenge is when our wiring, our nervous system, becomes overwhelmed. When what we are hearing, what we are seeing, what we are feeling is too much. And that's what the pandemic is bringing to us at this stage. And it can come in waves. It can come in waves because we can actually sometimes bring our anxiety down through sleep, through meditation, through walking. But then we hear more news and the anxiety comes back again, and sometimes even higher. The thing to know also about anxiety is it's not just mental. Anxiety is also physical. It's cognitive in our mind, and it's behavioral. So if we are feeling anxious, what it might look like or feel like is headaches, stomach upsets, trouble sleeping. I can testify to that one. Changes in our eating patterns. We will also find it's very difficult to make good decisions at this time because of our fear and our behavior and our anxiety. My own mother, just to give an example, is 89, and she's finding it incomprehensible that we have to be in self-isolation and away from her children. And she also can't understand when the government says about this curve that we've got to get over. But the more we explain it to her, the more anxious she becomes. So she's not able to make good decisions. And I suspect, especially you who are major superiors, that you are facing many challenges with sisters and communities not making good decisions at this time. I also want to mention, and I think what's terribly important for us is that we all have different thresholds that can bring about anxiety. So while we are all wired, We are all wired differently based on our previous experiences and our personality. So people become anxious at different times, and we're not always in harmony in our anxiety, if I can say that. And maybe if I return to stress, our stress is different. So stress tends to be caused by external factors, bad news, being restricted by the government to being isolated, whereas the anxiety is our internal response to this stress. So I'll say that again. Our stress is different to anxiety. So we're wired to be anxious when there's a threat, and we respond with anxiety. That anxiety has different expressions, as I've said before. The stress we experience as well is due to the external factors, the unknown, the news, the radio reports, the bells tolling. They bring a reaction to us that can increase our anxiety. Now, what I want to say again and further about this is it's important to recognize what's happening to you. And it's also important to recognize what's happening to others. Because as I've said, we don't all express stress or anxiety the same way. And that's the challenge, especially in community. That's our biggest challenge at this time. What the people tell us is to, when we are stressed and when we are anxious, to talk to friends, family, read a novel, garden if you can, listen to music. These suggestions are strategies, and they're strategies to break the circuit. There's strategies to stop the anxiety and the stress building up, building up, building up. So they are circuit breakers. They can bring the anxiety and stress down. And again, at the same time, we all have different strategies that work for us. And it's helpful to know those. And I really invite people to think back to what's helped in the past. But also I invite people to say, talk to friends and family, because sometimes people can give you good feedback about that. It's also very important, if I can say, to limit some of our behavior. And you'll see again on the top of my image here, to limit worrying and agitation, to limit what is causing our anxiety and stress. So the suggestion here given, and I endorse this suggestion, is to limit the amount of time we're listening to the news, to the media about what's happening in our country, what's happening in our world. I mean, I've tried to set some boundaries where I try to listen in the morning when I awake, in the middle of the day, and then in the evening, but not every hour. Because remember, as I said before, if one has anxiety and you get more information, it comes like a wave. I mean, my friend used the image of the tsunami. It comes like a wave and it can overwhelm you again. So another strategy is to limit. It's very important at this time that we know what's going on, but we don't have to know all of the time what's happening. To limit is helpful. It also, pardon me, it also helps us when we limit to not do what often happens when we're anxious, which is what we call reruns. Where in our head, we keep repeating the same story and we let the story get stronger and stronger. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if we can't go to the bank? What if we run out of food? What if we haven't got enough toilet paper? What if we haven't? And they're the circuit breakers that we need to reduce and to break. Otherwise, the reruns just get faster and faster. So the strategy on this one is to limit our exposure to the bad news without ignoring the bad news, if I can say that. Limit it in the sense of what can you responsibly hold and manage while still being responsible. The other thing that's very strongly talked about is self-care at this time. And again, this is a circuit breaker. All of us have different mechanisms for self-care that have helped you in the past. I've already mentioned, for example, meditation. Embroidery. One of my sisters has just gone out and bought knitting needles. I don't think she's done knitting for years. Some people can paint. A lot of people are taking to cooking. And I think the vast majority of us are cleaning. We all have different activities, but these are activities that, again, are to break some of these circuits of the unrelenting anxiety that comes from continually listening to the stresses, to the news, to the bad news. We use all these to calibrate our experience of the pandemic. And again, I'm wanting to come back to saying that there's a couple of issues here that we need to deal with. Each of us, I'll repeat it again, has a different threshold, different strategies. So we're not going to be in harmony with our teams or with our community. We really need to be able to find what works best for us. But in doing that, it's very helpful to reach out and talk with others so that they also know what you're managing with and what you're trying to adjust to. The issue that our governments have talked about in particular, I was in America and now I'm in Australia, there was a lot of discussion going on about social isolation. We needed to isolate socially. And now there's been quite a shift in our language to physical isolation because it's become more and more apparent that people need that social component. Because as I said earlier, what the virus has done is affect the very way we relate. And what's important at this time is to actually keep in good communication with friends. And I'm sure you've had the same experience where people have reached out to you that you haven't heard of or possibly even thought of for years. People are socially connecting at this time. And finally, just on this image that I have here, there's in the bottom corner, to deal with our emotions in a healthy manner. I'm sure many of you are aware that we have amongst us, and indeed in ourselves, we have vulnerabilities. And a time like this is a time when vulnerabilities are highlighted, are heightened. So it's not the time to take up smoking. It's not the time to increase our drinking. And for those of us who have the responsibility or the concern of people who appear not to be managing, it's also terribly important for us to know where there is professional help should we need it. And by that, I mean, there is now a lot of work happening in countries around telemedicine and the opportunity to re-engage with counsellors or psychologists in your own country by phone or by internet. Because some of the people that we have in our communities and in our life will not be able to calibrate, as I've indicated to you, because of their vulnerabilities. And then our role, those of us who are stressed and anxious, but still able to play out our role of being aware of others and concerned for them, it's our role to, where possible, find the professional assistance that those people need. And if it's not externally available, what do we have within our own orders that might help? Now, I'm going to pause because I've got a second section that I want to talk to you about, but I'm just aware that there might be some questions. So I'm just going to close that image for a minute and come back to do we have some questions about what I've said?
Thank you, Sister Maryanne. We are a very huge group. We are
Yes.
186 views, but there are congregational community who are following this meeting together. So this shows that it's really a need for us to listen to you, your experience. So perhaps if you like, you can write some questions or comments in the chat, or we can have a session at the end, even though we do not have a lot of time. So perhaps I suggest you to continue, Maryanne.
Okay, perfect.
Because the goal of this meeting was most to listen to you and then to have time for us to reflect on that. USG
Okay.
will offer other events to elaborate and to talk. Is that okay with you?
Yep, completely fine. Thank you, Patricia. I'm going to come to another dimension, which is one that we don't see a lot of from World Health Organization or from the Red Cross or Red Crescent, and that's the area of spirituality and faith. It's interesting that this doesn't surface a lot in the literature that's around, because we know at times like this that a lot of people around the world rely on their faith. It's a neglect, I have to say, in psychology and social work. Often people are reluctant to talk about this, but for us, I think it's terribly important. This comes from, as you can see, the US Conference of Catholic Bishops. It's an image for us. Our faith and our spirituality at this time are great resources for us. And I think it's important for us to know that not everybody shares that or feels that as such. From our faith, or through our faith, what's very clear is that the people of God have faced the plagues and pandemics before. You just have to look at our Psalms. Our Psalms are laments. They're laments about the experience of the people in circumstances like we are experiencing now. We're also in Lent. And in Lent, this is a time for us to really think, and I know it's very, very difficult, but like, what could be the grace in this moment for us? What are our desires? I think we're very fortunate to be people who are not only concerned about stress and anxiety, but we bring also our lens or our faith to this pandemic. I think, though, for us, it's a challenge, if I can say that. I've seen a lot online where masses are being said online and the rosaries being said on the internet, and people are praying at a certain time every day. I think that's great. It's a great gift. But I personally think it needs to be balanced with what I spoke about earlier. We need to be addressing the psychological and emotional needs of our sisters in our community, as well as the spiritual needs. So there needs to be a balance, if I can say that. I think both are needed. I'm going to now move on from there, but again, I'll be happy to come back, again, acknowledging that there's a lot of good resources out there. But I'm wanting to touch on a few other things that, again, still have not been expressed, and I'm not seeing it in our in the general material that's around. As religious, and I think the vast majority of us on this call are religious, people of faith, as I've said, we have a particular love of the poor. Our ministries reflect this. And this virus has a disproportional impact on the poor. Nations that we care about are even more devastated than many of the nations that we are in at present. And one of the challenges for us and in one sense can be also a circuit breaker, is for us to be planning what can we do to respond to the places of ministry where we have been strong in the past. It's an invitation for us as we experience in our countries where we are now. As you know, the pandemic is still rolling out. I've mentioned already Myanmar. Yesterday I spoke to a Sister of Mercy in Cambodia. I'm aware, and they're aware, that there is very little resource that's going to be brought to those countries. So where are we as religious in this? You will see in the literature that there's quite a bit of discussion going on for showing compassion at this time. Now, we can take that at many, many levels, as we do in our religious life. But I'm saying this now as a psychologist. We are going to find living in community, given the stresses that I've talked about, we are going to be personally challenged to be with other sisters, or to be with other community members, or to communicate with others because of their reactions and their anxiety. This is normal. We are going to need to be patient, and we're going to need to be forgiving, because the explanation that I'm giving is that this, what appears to be people being insensitive or people being off on another planet, is their anxiety. And again, our challenge is to help them to reduce the anxiety, to circuit break the anxiety. Prayer helps, as I've said, Mass on the internet helps, but they also need other help. More than ever, we need insight into the mental health of the elderly, because many of our sisters are elderly. And what I'm really aware of is the discussions that are going on all the time about the vulnerability of the elderly at this time, and the statistics of who's died and how it's the elderly. And this time in religious life, most of us are elderly. So we are listening to a message that's coming about our own lifestyle, our own way of being profoundly affected. We also, at this stage, need to be kind to ourselves. So while the invitation is to be patient and to be understanding, it's not easy. And we are going to need to be kind to ourselves. And what I mean by that, when I look at some of the suggestions around, some of the suggestions are saying now is not the time to go on a diet. Now is not the time to clean out the files or to read the original Aquinas. Now is the time to find comfort books, comfort activities, comfort food even for us, so that we can be comforted in these difficult times and be hopefully in a better position to work with the sisters that we most care for. A couple of other points I want to just mention. What's also coming through is the challenge of not shaming people who have contracted the virus, not shaming people whose behavior is such that we are uncomfortable and thinking they're bringing it into our houses. As religious, it's not helpful, we know, for shaming, but also that challenge of compassion and being kind is something that will help us to be more caring. And that's what we're being challenged to do at the moment. We have, and I've mentioned it before, all communities have sisters who in the past have shown their vulnerabilities. They will be more vulnerable at this time. And again, I've mentioned about the need for us to continue to find resources for them. that continues to need to happen. Otherwise, the community itself can be absorbed by the anxiety and stress of that sister or sisters. Lastly, on this point, one thing I want to also mention is, because of our age, I think it's helpful to actually encourage people to reach out and talk to other generations. I'm talking about nieces and nephews and students. They have a different take on what's happening. They may not have always the most realistic take on what's happening, but they can also break open new thinking. It was a young person, one of my students, who spoke to me first about, let's not use the term social distancing, let's use physical distancing. And that really gave me great pause for thinking. And I was grateful to her for her telling me this. So again, in this time when we are getting information, and normally we get it from particular sources, like from the radio, from the BBC, from reputable sources. The young have different sources. And that can also sometimes help us just to get a different perspective. I'm coming close to the end of the main points I wanted to make. I think that the next thing is just to say this time will pass. It's going to get, in many countries, more difficult, but it will pass. And the biggest challenge for us at this time is to put in place strategies to ride out what's happening at the moment. There are many strategies online, but I've tried to take time today to elaborate some of the ones that I think may be more pertinent to our way of life. And as Patricia said, we will have material to send out to you. We will be available to do more opportunities for discussion, but I've just wanted to lay out at the moment some of the better ways that people are saying at the moment can help us to cope in these extraordinary times. Thank you.
Thank you
Patricia,
very much,
to you.
Maryanne. Yes, here I am. It's difficult to speak immediately after your reflection, because I think that all of us are really touched and moved by what you were saying. I have the impression that perhaps most of us know at this level what you were sharing. The difficulty is to integrate that in our daily life when we feel so fragile and so vulnerable. You can send the questions in the chat. I don't know if if we are able to answer to all, but don't worry, because we will have other opportunity to talk about that. So I would like to invite Sister Maryanne to read the question, but I would like now to give the floor to Sister Pat Murray and to Sister Yolanda. First, Sister Pat Murray, you have to speak in the English room so Claudia can translate. So I invite you to share with us, Pat, what USG is doing, what we can do more, on how we can accompany the sisters during this time.
I am going to unmute people so they can unmute themselves, their microphone. If you want to speak, you can unmute your microphone. But you have to unmute before you speak.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And thank you very much, Maryanne. I thank you on all our behalf, on the over 180 people and communities who are attending. And I'm very grateful for your very thoughtful presentation and very informative presentation. I think one of the points, excuse me, that really struck me as you spoke was, you know, on the one hand, paying attention to the psychological needs and balancing that with the spiritual and vice versa. That we hold those two areas, our human psychological needs and also, in a sense, our spiritual way of proceeding and the supports that are there. I think the other point that struck me was that there would be enough space at an individual level to allow the individual to process what's happening to her or to him, and at the same time acknowledging that we all have different rhythms, and at the same time there's a way in which the community itself responds. So that balance between sufficient space for the individual and then the community holding both the individual but holding the group together. And the role of leadership in all of that seems to be very important, and you've highlighted that. I'll just comment a little on what UISG has been doing during these days. Obviously, first of all, we're trying to respond at many different levels. At the level of prayer, you've seen our prayer together during March for the world and calling religious communities to pray together in solidarity for the needs of the whole world. And that was greatly appreciated by so many. And we continue, in a sense, that union of minds and hearts, knowing that in a way we're trying to not support ourselves, but also support the pain of the world at this time, support the anxiety of people. We've also had many signs of our connectedness worldwide, and I just give you one example. I had a message on Friday from the sisters in China who wrote to me to say, we are sending you 3 boxes with 9,000 masks for communities in Italy. And I thought that was a wonderful sign of solidarity. And there are many of those. And I think one of the things we could do as we move along in the future is to share these stories of hope and these stories of goodness, where we as sisters reach out to others, reach out to one another to support each other. We've been engaged in ongoing communication with congregational leaders, sending materials or answering questions. There have been a lot of questions about the postponement of general chapters. We've also been answering questions about care of the young in our communities, particularly candidates, postulants, or novices who are in our care and are not members of our institute, not full members of our institute. Our formation program here at UISG has gone ahead. It's now online, and I would pay a tribute to Sister Cynthia, who leads that with the 44 sisters, 43 of them here in Rome and one of them who has returned home. So that bond too of connecting people. I'd like to pay tribute especially to our sisters in Sicily and to the work that Sister Florence is doing. And they're doing what they can to reach out to migrants and refugees in an appropriate way and according to what's allowed. They're also living in very small conditions, in very small spaces, and that's one of the things I think that there will be sisters among us because of their mission and ministry, living alone or living in small spaces. And I'm conscious of that. Very grateful to our sisters in Sicily for the work that they're doing and for their presence. We have invited congregations who have been impacted if they want to call on us for prayer. But in the middle of crisis, that's not something that you do and do easily. So I think we just need to know there are many among us in our different places who have lost members, as Maryanne said at the beginning, and for whom this is a great time of suffering and prayer. And prayer for them, I think, united with them and with our family members, with our communities, with our parishioners, with the context in which we're situated. I think we're trying to be present there. I think it's a call, in a sense, to a new kind of presence, presence that has a physical distance, but is still a presence, and that we find the ways of assuring people that we are present. We have received messages particularly from medical people and doctors, appealing for our accompaniment in prayer. And so I offer that to you as another group. I think of people in prison. You know, I try to think of contexts in which we can really reach out in this moment in our prayer. The other area where I have been very involved in the last number of days has been working with foundations who have been particularly supportive of UISG, who are now looking at how to raise funds and make finances available, particularly to communities who are in great financial difficulty because of the coronavirus, because maintaining a house, particularly if you have elderly sisters, which has to be engaged in deep cleaning and also in the purchase of medical supplies and medical equipment that wouldn't normally be in the house. This has been quite a burden and a strain for some communities. And so with these foundations, we at UISG are trying to build up a fund which we would then disperse through probably conferences of religious or directly to congregations. And a lot will depend on how much money that is available. We've also been in contact with, through various embassies, with possible funding that their governments would supply, either directly to countries, but also we're conscious of, as Sister Maryanne said earlier, of countries where the virus, they're beginning to prepare for the arrival of the virus, or the virus in a sense has only begun to be felt in that country. And we're trying to look at ways to get some small grants made available to communities, particularly those who have clinics or hospitals or healthcare centres. So these are some of the activities that we at UISG are doing. We continue to meet as the coordinating team at UISG. We meet, and then the whole staff, we try to meet on a 2-weekly basis and to share what we're doing. So we invite you, if there's any way that you can, that you need something that you feel we could help, or that you have some suggestion that we as sisters who are present globally, how we could respond, please send us an email and we will do our best to contact you or to discern the suggestions you are making and see how we can move forward together. And now I would ask Sister Yolanda if she would like to say something at this stage.
Thank you, Sister Pat. Thank you for what you are doing to accompany the sisters. While Sister Yolanda prepares herself, she has to select the Spanish room. I would like to ask Maryanne to answer a couple of questions and then to leave Yolanda to close our meeting. So, Maryanne, I selected 2 questions in Italian because I guess that you couldn't understand. So then it's up to you to decide which English questions you can answer. I'm aware that there are a lot of needs and questions. The questions that I highlighted is one the frustration that some sisters are experiencing because they cannot continue their mission. So they feel like a conflict between the will to go ahead with the mission and with the preoccupation to be, in security and to be safe also for the rest of the community. And the second is about communication, how we can communicate in a positive way within the community so we can nurture this communion. Thank you, Maryanne.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a couple of other questions that also have come up in English. One thing that I omitted to say, it was in my notes, but I didn't say it, is we are also people of many, not only ages, but also different cultures. So there is no one sort of recipe that works for everybody because of their different cultural experiences, as I said earlier, their personality and previous experiences. So these are all just suggestions. The communication one, I have talked to several communities where they've actually sometimes chosen to sit silently for some of the meals, which might sound like a contradiction, but being now in isolation or in quarantine together, they've become worn out from speaking. So some people have suggested just different things like changing around the community room so that because of social distancing, there's a little bit more space, or making smaller areas for people to sit. It's almost like breaking up what's been the pattern to see if new patterns emerge. But the most important thing is talking with people about what they would find to be helpful. Do they want to be where there's just quiet music at lunch or at dinner? Would that be helpful? Where are the breakout spaces where we can put chairs that people previously, where they haven't sat, could now sit? So I think the suggestion I would say is to engage with with people, but also try to think of something new, not to just try to make the old work as such. There was another question which I just want to refer to about sisters coming back in particular nurses, and the fear that that puts in the community. I think that these are desperate times, and so I think it is realistic for us to think about separating people so that that fear doesn't overwhelm. I know that's a very difficult thing for some people, but I know in many parts of the world, for example, nurses are now staying away from their family because of the nature of their work. So I think it does warrant, again, us to think differently, not because the sisters who are nurses are not taking good action, but the fear of the people receiving them may not be manageable, and that can create enormous tensions. And Patricia, to the question you mentioned, this is one that I've known many times. When in refugee work, we've had to evacuate people from war zones or from conflict settings, and they've been taken off what I would call the boil. They've been in a very busy work, a very committed work, and suddenly they're away. It's terribly, they get very disoriented because they want to be in their work. The other day I was talking with a sister who had returned from working in the slums in Nairobi, and that's all she could think about. Those people probably need extra listening from us, extra resource, but between us, we find out what will help them. As I say, there is no one recipe. They may need to be given a particular task in the house where they are now to give them recognition and purpose and structure. It might seem not at all what they normally can do, but again, I use this term of circuit breaking, of just trying to take people out of that space where their head is going on and on with the same spheres, and it builds up and up. I think also I think what we do need to do, and it's the last point I want to comment on is community life isn't always easy. This is not the first time that we've been challenged, all of us, in community life, but it is extraordinarily challenging at the moment. We do possibly need to sometimes have people be moderators. There will be tensions. There will be times when we're sorry that we said what we said, or we slammed the door that we slammed, or whatever. But the call at this time is one of compassion. And it might be the time when we have to have that tough talk with the sister about her behavior, because she may not be as aware as we are of how that's impacting on her and on others. So it is a time for communication more than ever. But again, and I said this was the last thing, communication outside of our communities as well, with families, with friends, so that we're also getting fresh voices and fresh insight. People are using very creative ways of Zoom. Here on my computer, there's lots of choirs who are getting together and being conducted and singing music, and those sorts of things can also help. So inviting sisters to actually do different activities to what we would normally do can enhance our communication in a different way. So would it be good to do exercise together or singing together? It really does warrant, it's a time when we should be thinking differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maryanne, for your suggestions. And we are receiving comments in the chat, but also email, saying that showing the creativity that the community are experiencing in order to keep up, you know, the mood and to nurture the sisterhood. So I want to now give the floor to Sister Yolanda for a final word before I will give you some notes about the next event. Sister Yolanda, if you want to speak in English or in Italian, you have to change the room according with the language you are going to use. Your microphone is on.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you. Thanks to Maryanne for sharing her experience and many insights that come from what she shared. The first positive element is that we can face anxiety, considering it with a positive aspect, because it leads us to creativity, to go out of our small environments and to overcome this situation. Of course, our thought, first of all, is for those sisters, those congregations who are suffering directly this tsunami due to the pandemic and to sicknesses. And in Italy, in Spain, we know, for example, that is particularly affected also France, England, the United States, and we hope that we can keep being together and in union and help support the leadership also to animate and to give them some ideas and suggestions on how to properly and healthy use in a creative and productive way at the time. And this time that perhaps we might have more than usual. So what Maryanne invited us to have is a dialogue between spirituality and those which are the psychological aspects. And we really hope that this dialogue that is encouraged by UISG, we can keep maintaining this kind of dialogue and offer moments of sharing of experiences and offer something to reflect. And thanks to Sister Pat for sharing all the initiatives that we have been carrying out. And I would like to add that we talked about the possibility to sow hope through sharing the experiences and the creativity, solidarity, and also the moments of grief. So, as USG said, we will have an initiative to share. Therefore, we are also always in constant contact with the constellations and superiors general in order to support also on a personal level, especially those who lost their members due to the pandemic or are in self-isolation. So also I would like to invite to keep reading our faith, which is our light that enlightens us everything, and also to find inspiring texts of our founders. And our founders really can give us some ideas or their experiences, and their texts can give us ideas on how to live these moments. So also to enjoy this time in order to strengthen the communion among us, to build bridges with other organizations as well, and to be positive and constructive and give solidarity to those who need it the most, to face the situation in those areas in the world which will be facing the hard consequences of the pandemic. So thank you, and we are together in a union of prayers and working with Jesus in the Lent time that he is suffering in his body, which is the church, the humanity. Thank you. Thank you for the USG team for supporting.
Thank you very much, Sister Yolanda, for your words and for the feelings that you can perceive from your sharing. I want to reassure all the people that the chat will be recorded. So we will take care of your comments and all the things that you wrote here or ask, or the questions. I will also send to the people who registered for this webinar the material that Sister Maryanne has shared with us as the recorded videos. But if you didn't register and you received the link from other people, please write to me so I can send it to you. We are going to close this webinar. I just want to share with you that we have other 2 events before Easter, but we are already planning for the after Easter other events. Saturday, 4th of April, we will have the Station of Cross online from 3 to 4:30. All the information will be on our website in 1 hour. After this webinar, I will put everything on the webinar, on the website. So you will find there the information and the link to connect. So Saturday, 4th of April at 3 Rome time will be online, the Station of the Cross that we usually do in Rome. April the 7th at 2 p.m., we will have a webinar from the campaign Sowing Hope for the Planet, celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Laudato Si. It will be in 4 languages, and you will receive it by WhatsApp and by email, but in 1 hour will be in our website. I want to thank my colleagues who make this meeting possible. Claudia is translating into Italian, and Sister Florence and Sister Therese taking care of the technical side. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for your patience and your courageous experience now. I would like to invite you to some seconds of silence, just to make aware of the suffering and of the hope of the world in this moment, and trying to think of the people who are suffering. Thank you again, sisters, for being here. Don't forget, united in prayers, and we are not alone. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Maryanne.
Thank you very much.
And good night for you.
Yes. Good night. Stay
Thank
strong.
you. Stay strong. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.